we speak about the history of pitot tubes, the story does not end with their invention or their integration. It revolves precisely around them. This episode is not just about technology, it is about responsibility, timing, and the delicate balance between safety and tragedy. Today, we will explore how one small sensor managed to change the entire philosophy of aircraft maintenance and pilot training. Even before the tragedy of Air France Flight 447 in June 2009, regulators and manufacturers were already aware that certain models of pitot tubes, especially the Thales AA probes, were showing vulnerabilities. Reports of ice crystals obstructing these sensors had been documented on several Airbus A330s and A340s. Crews had reported temporary loss of airspeed data in high-altitude tropical zones, but luckily, until then, flights had managed to recover. The industry had already decided that the Thales probes needed to be replaced with the more reliable Goodrich models. But bureaucracy, delays, and logistical challenges meant that not every aircraft had undergone the change in time. This delay, as history would tragically prove, carried a very high cost. On the night of May 31, 2009, Air France Flight 447 departed Rio de Janeiro, bound for Paris. It was a routine long-haul journey across the Atlantic, with 228 people on board. While crossing the equatorial Atlantic, the aircraft encountered severe storm activity. At cruising altitude, the pitot tubes froze, depriving the crew of reliable airspeed information. With inconsistent data, the autopilot disengaged, leaving the pilots in a highly stressful, confusing situation. In the darkness, above the ocean, surrounded by turbulence, the crew struggled to understand what was happening. The Airbus A330 entered a high-altitude stall. The nose was pulled too high, the wings lost lift, and despite alarms and warnings, the situation was never corrected. After a terrifying descent of nearly 4 minutes, the jet crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. All 228 passengers and crew lost their lives.
La sua morte sta come morte sulle conseguenze che per molte reti potere illimitato sulla coscienza e il conflitto spirituale, forse più straordinario. La storia è una
The shock was profound. A single seemingly simple sensor failure had triggered a cascade of events, exposing flaws in both technology and human training. It is striking to remember that Air France Flight 447 was scheduled to be the very last journey of that specific Airbus A330. Ironically, the very next day, the new generation of Goodrich Pitot tubes was already prepared to replace the faulty Thales models. A timing so bitter that it still resonates as one of the most tragic what-ifs in aviation history. Had the replacements come just days earlier, the disaster might have been avoided. This coincidence remains one of the darkest reminders of how timing and maintenance decisions can decide between life and death in aviation. From a practical and theoretical point of view, pitot tubes represent far more than a technical sensor. They are, in many ways, the light that illuminates the pilot's and the engineer's understanding of the aircraft's behavior. Their reliability, or lack thereof, has become a cornerstone in how aviation maintenance is considered. The tragedy of Flight 447 forced regulators, airlines, and manufacturers to recognize that even the smallest component can shape the entire safety philosophy of modern flight. It was no longer just about engines, wings, or autopilot systems. It was about understanding that every detail matters. Disaster, airlines accelerated the replacement of pitot tubes worldwide. Air France, in particular, faced legal battles, criticism, and immense pressure from the families of the victims. The entire industry was forced to rethink priorities and maintenance. No longer could small anomalies be tolerated. Every issue, no matter how minor it seemed, had to be treated with the highest urgency.
Sir, yes. Sir, yes.
Today, pitot tubes have advanced in design, materials, and heating systems to prevent ice accumulation. Maintenance protocols have been revised to ensure constant monitoring, replacement cycles, and system redundancy. Simulators now train pilots extensively on how to respond to unreliable airspeed situations, reinforcing discipline and clarity in moments of confusion. The legacy of AF447 can be seen in every pre-flight checklist, every maintenance log, and every training manual that stresses vigilance. Safety now begins at the smallest scale, because the smallest scale can change everything. Ultimately, the legacy of the pitot tube is paradoxical. Born as a simple scientific instrument in the 18th century, it became an essential part of modern flight. But through tragedy, it forced aviation to evolve. Its story reminds us that progress and safety often comes at a high cost. And it reminds us of one crucial truth: even the smallest part of an airplane can change the destiny of aviation itself.